And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather is showing the next weakening front here, pushing slowly eastward across the Aleutians with some wind and rain associated with it, but nothing really strong. And then this weak cold front here dragging into the western Alaska range, but all the moisture, snowfall, will stay either in the range or to the north of south central Alaska as it just stays variably cloudy down that way. Otherwise, dry out here over the southwest interior and diminishing rain, but it won't end completely. Still a little breezy and wet for the Panhandle up to Yakutat, and areas of snow as that low shifts eastward there over the northeast interior. Another trough here over the western Arctic coast keeps a chance of snow there. That kind of lingers into tomorrow as well. Another trough here keeps a chance of snow over the eastern North Slope and Arctic coast. Snow showers down into the Alaska range, mostly sunny south central Alaska, as well as the southwest interior, and probably to Kodiak Island as well, and still damp over the southeast coast, but a lot less wind, and the rainfall rates a lot lighter than what they have been. And this front pushes rain into the eastern Aleutians, which on Friday, that whole system drops off to the southeast there. So east-northeast winds, maybe up to gusts to 35 miles an hour, possibly for the Fox Islands. But light winds as you head north here into the central Bering Sea with a lot of clearing and dry conditions with light winds over the southern two-thirds of the state. Brooks range out to the Arctic coast. Still a chance of some light snow flurries or snow showers. Dry for the Panhandle for a change. And for the coastal water forecast, southwest winds 15 or 25 knots for the south coast. West winds 30 knots for the central and north coast. Seas up to 15 feet. Southeast winds tomorrow. 25 gusts 40 knots for Lynn Canal, east winds 45 knots for Stevens Passage, and then southeast at 20 for Clarence Strait. And then for Friday, light winds here on the south coast out of the west at 10 knots, 15 knots for the central coast and the north coast, north to west winds at 10 knots. Lynn Canal, south at 10, Stevens Passage, southeast at 10, and Clarence Strait, south winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Prince William Sound for Thursday, north winds 30 knots, seas at 6 feet. Small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast with northwest winds at 30 knots. Same forecast for the Barren Islands. Seas all through that area 8 to 10 feet. Gale warnings for Kamishak Bay west at 35. Cook Inlet northwest 15 to 20 knots. And then for Friday, Cook Inlet northerlies at 15 to 20 knots, 3 to 5 foot seas. 25 knot winds out of the north for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, seas 5 to 6 feet. North Gulf Coast, north winds 15 knots. And Prince William Sound, north winds 15 knots. Kodiak Island for Thursday, westerlies 20 to 25 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula, south to southeast 20 to 25 knots. Bristol Bay, northwest at 20. And for Friday, northeast winds here for the Alaska Peninsula, 30 to 35 knots with 9 to 8 foot seas. Northeast at 25 for Bristol Bay, seas up to 5 feet there. And Kodiak Island, north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, seas only at about 4 feet. Eastern Aleutians got gales out for tomorrow as that front approaches from the west, from the south-southeast at 35 knots. Adak and Atka behind the front, winds come down, southwest 20 knots, and then northwest 25 knots for the western Aleutians. And for Friday, northeast winds 20 to 25 knots there west of Adak, and northerlies at 25 knots for the central Aleutians here. In the eastern Aleutians, Fox Islands, north to northeast winds 25 to 35 knots. For the southwest coast, northeast winds tomorrow 10 to 20 knots, northwest at 15 for St. Lawrence Island, and northwest at 20 for Norton Sound. Gale warnings here over the northern Bering Sea and St. Matthew Island, northeast 35 knots there, east 25 for the Pribilofs. And then those pick up to 30 knots out of the northeast for St. Paul and St. George, while the winds drop off to 20 knots out of the east for St. Matthew Island. 25 knot northeast winds for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, northeast 15 for the Yukon Delta Coast. Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, north winds 15 knots with 3 foot seas. And for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, northwest at 25 knots, west-northwest 20 knots for the western Arctic coast. Central coast will have the lightest winds, and that'll be west at 15 knots tomorrow. Otherwise, the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, northeast winds 20 knots. And then winds pick up there considerably, both for the central and western Arctic coast, up to 30 knots, with seas building to 6 to 8 feet. And for the western Arctic coast, northwest 25 knots, and the Chukchi Sea looking at northwest winds at 20 knots with 7-foot seas.